It was 1970, and Jacqueline, or Jackie Ansell-Lamb as she preferred to be called, was an 18-year-old secretary who worked in Manchester. She was described as a 60s teenager. On the weekend of the 7th to the 8th of March 1970, she had spent time collecting belongings from her old house in London to take back to Manchester. She then attended a party in Earl's Court where she met a young man. On Sunday the 8th of March 1970, she attempted to hitchhike back to Manchester from London. She'd been given a lift by a man that she'd met at that party to one of the slip roads of the M1 motorway. She then intended to hitch a lift northwards.
A young man she'd just met dropped her off at one of the London slip roads to the M1.
If I had the money, I'd lend you the train fare.
It's all right, forget it.
It's just I don't like you hitching all that way.
No, I said it's all right.
Do you want my phone number?
No. Here's mine. Give us a ring sometime.
She was heading back to Manchester, where she worked as a secretary. Jackie shared a lift with another hitchhiker 50 miles up the M1 to Buckinghamshire, but how she travelled further north from there isn't known.
Jacqueline Ansell-Lamb was reported missing on the 9th of March when she did not show up back to work in Manchester. On the day she disappeared, she was last seen wearing a blonde wig, false eyelashes, and a dark blue coat with maroon shoes. She was also carrying a Japan Airlines bag because the initials of the company were the same as hers. The last place Jackie was positively seen was at a transport cafe named the Opera Cafe at High Lea, just off junction 20 of the M6 motorway near Warrington in Cheshire. So she wasn't that far from home at this point. But between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m, she was seen in this cafe with the company of a man. A number of witnesses cited her, including the chef.
There were a number of people who saw them here on that evening 20 years ago, and one of them, Delia Brown.
I remember very vividly, there was a man come through the door. He went up to her, and then he came up for 2 coffees. He was smartly dressed, business-like clothing, and within seconds I went back down there to look around, and he was sitting with her talking. We're up there about half an hour or more. And I remember them going through the door, and I could see it was a car she got into.
She said that she saw him sitting and talking to Jackie, and the man was described as smartly dressed in kind of business-like clothing. The pair left together and she got into the man's car, but it was believed to have been a white Jaguar. A final unconfirmed sighting of Jackie was her thumbing a lift on the A556 road 1 mile from where her body was found, as on the 14th of March, the partially clothed body of Jacqueline Ansell-Lamb was found by a 10-year-old boy and his father as they walked through woodland in Cheshire, just off the M6 motorway near the cafe where she was last seen. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Her body had then been posed. She had bruises and cuts on her neck and on her face, which indicated that she'd fought with her attacker.
This is the last place that Jackie Ansell-Lamb was seen in March of 1970. It's a transport cafe just off the M6 near Warrington in Cheshire, and at that time I was a newly appointed detective constable and was seconded onto the inquiry to assist in the murder investigation.
Barbara Mayo was a 24-year-old who lived in Hammersmith in London. She had just graduated university and not decided on a full-time career. After graduating, she had hitchhiked her way around Europe as a way of taking a year out after studies and travelling cheaply. But when she returned, still not knowing exactly what she wanted to do with her career, she started earning money by buying and selling cars in the London area. But if she saw a bargain anywhere else in the country and it was just too good to pass by, she would arrange to pick it up and hitchhike her way there, Barbara had seen a good deal on a car. It was a Mini and advertised in a newspaper. She called the garage to arrange to pick it up and asked when they were going to be open.
Hello, yes, it's Barbara Mayo. Yes, about the Mini. I just want to know what time you close tonight. No, that's fine, 7:30. Yep, I'll come up today.
The only problem was that this vehicle was in Yorkshire, which is nowhere near London. But on the 12th of October 1970, Barbara set off to hitchhike to Catterick in North Yorkshire to pick up the Mini that she'd seen advertised. But she did not turn up, and 2 days after she left London, her boyfriend reported her missing. She was last seen wearing a navy blue coat, lilac jersey and gold and tan trousers. She was thought to have been carrying a red bag. 4 days later, a family walking in an isolated wood just off the M1 motorway near Chesterfield, Derbyshire, discovered a partially clothed body under a pile of leaves. This lady had been raped, battered around the head and strangled to death with the length of a flex. Despite a detailed search, her bag containing her purse was never recovered. The media dubbed the killer of Barbara Mayo the monster of the motorway. A massive police hunt was launched by Cheshire Police, involving 120 officers. Investigators soon determined that neither the man Jackie Ansell-Lamb had met in Earl's Court or any other male associates could have been responsible for her murder. As many fans of Manchester City were known to have travelled along the M6 from London to Manchester on the weekend of Jackie's murder, investigators theorised that the killer could have been one of those individuals. The brutal killing of Barbara Mayo led to what was described as Britain's biggest ever motorway hunt. The investigation into her murder was led by Detective Superintendent Chris Pollard from Scotland Yard. 1,500 police officers quizzed more than 125,000 people on motorways and took nearly 50,000 statements. In an unprecedented move, police set up checkpoints across a 150-mile stretch of the M1 between London and Leeds to ask drivers if they had any information.
Mr. Palmer, is there any appeal you want to make to young people who might be thinking of hitchhiking up the M1?
Don't.
Superintendent Charlie Palmer decided on an unprecedented move. He brought the entire M1 to a virtual standstill. For a whole day, every vehicle at every junction along the 150-mile length of the motorway was stopped and checked. Everyone was a possible suspect. He then staged a reconstruction for the media.
Today's reconstruction of Barbara Mayo's last journey began in Rockley Road, Hammersmith, at number 40 Rockley Road, the murdered girl's home.
The girl, you can see, is dressed in the actual clothing of Barbara Mayo, who was murdered a short distance from the 29 intersection of the M1 motorway on Monday, the 12th of October.
And officers then launched a publicity campaign with posters pasted all over Britain. It was believed that some men who might have given lifts to female hitchhikers at the time had not come forward because they did not want their wives to know, or maybe thought that they would be charged with something they'd not done. The police appealed to them by saying that their wives would not be told if they came forward with information. A reconstruction was broadcast on television a week after the motorway checkpoints were set up, covering Barbara Mayo's last known movements from her home in Hammersmith to the M1 motorway. The reconstruction led to 700 members of the public coming forward to say that they'd sighted Barbara Mayo. A significant sighting came from a man who'd said he was certain that he'd seen Barbara Mayo or a girl fitting her description at 4 p.m. on the 12th of October thumbing a lift and then getting into a white Morris Traveller at Kimberley, Nottinghamshire.
One in particular that police thought significant in the town of Kimberley, just off the M1 in Nottinghamshire.
Me and my mate was returning home from work and we passed the Morris Traveller parked at the crossroads. A little bit further on there was a nice looking girl thumbing a lift. I said to him, if I hadn't got you with me, I would give her a lift. Looking through my mirror, I saw the Morris Traveller pick her up. They followed us down to the M1 and that's where I lost sight of them. I'm sure the girl in the Morris Traveller was Barbara Mayo.
This was less than 20 miles from where she was found dead and was located just off the motorway. The driver was described as being in his 30s, medium build with mousy hair, brushed forwards. Police believe that the driver of this Morris was her killer, and at the time 100,000 Morris travellers were on the road in Britain, and each and every owner had to be traced and eliminated. Each driver of the Morris travellers in the country was spoken to, and despite this, the driver of the Morris traveller never came forward. The records of 28,000 criminals were checked and 76 leads were looked into. Barbara Mayo was known to have caught the tube from Hammersmith to Hendon and then thumbed a lift onto the M1. It's believed that 250,000 motorists were using the northbound carriageway of the M1 at the time Barbara left. At the time of Barbara Mayo's murder inquiry, it was the largest investigation ever mounted by one of Britain's police force. Media reports soon suggested a link between the two murders, noting the clear similarities. Both had been picked up in and around the M1. Both had been sexually assaulted. Both had been murdered with a cord or flex, left in a wooded area, and they were both partially clothed. Investigators confirmed that they were looking into the links, and during the investigation, a man claiming to be the killer sent a note to detectives saying that the Barbara Mayo murder would not be his last. Then the Yorkshire Ripper, Mr. Peter Sutcliffe, began his murder spree in the 70s, and the Derbyshire Constabulary investigated whether the killings could be linked to him. Upon being convicted of the Ripper murders in 1981, he was formally questioned in connection with the two deaths, and it was known he also had a Morris traveller and had travelled to and from London around October 1970. Peter Sutcliffe was finally eliminated from their inquiries in 1997. By 1990, Cheshire Police and Derbyshire Police increasingly suspected that the two murders were connected. In January 1991, the lead investigators on each murder case from two forces appeared on a joint appeal on Crime Watch, saying that they were no means certain, but they thought they were looking for the same man, with the striking similarities in the cases. It was announced that Cheshire and Derbyshire Police had decided to combine forces in the attempt to solve these two crimes. By now, it was 20 years later, and still nobody had come forward and nobody had been convicted. But with enhances in DNA technology, hopefully this might help. A number of women came forward after the appeals to say that they had been sexually assaulted in the same area where Barbara Mayo was last seen, shortly before she was found murdered. The lead investigator on the Jackie Ansell-Lamb murder case revealed on Crime Watch that forensic scientists had recovered several pieces of carpet fibre from Jackie's body, believed to have come from a carpet roll or carpet sample. Now, on the weekend that she was murdered, there had been a carpet exhibition at Earl's Court in London. Remember, she'd gone to Earl's Court to a party? Well, it was noted that the man that she was last seen with was described as a rep or a salesman, and that it was the investigators' belief that the murderer had some connections to the carpet industry. But my thought is, could these carpet fibres not be from the inside of the floor of a car? At the time, a lot of carpets were placed in the footwells of cars. In 1997, Derbyshire Police obtained a DNA profile of the killer of Barbara Mayo from her clothing, and police attempted to trace all of the 250 original suspects for DNA testing in order to see if their profiles matched. And by 2009, all but a handful had been located and eliminated. It was this DNA testing that also allowed detectives to eliminate Peter Sutcliffe from the investigation. Over 9,000 samples were taken from serving prisoners who were also examined, but none matched the killer's profile. Police were hopeful by now that the DNA developments, it would soon help to solve Barbara Mayo's murder. Detectives were also hopeful of DNA advances assisting the Jackie Ansell-Lamb inquiry and in determining whether the two women had been killed by the same man. A Derbyshire police spokesman said, "Should a test be successful and find the matching DNA, we would have a serial killer investigation, and that would be huge." However, in 1997, 27 years later, Cheshire Police revealed that they had not, at that point, been able to isolate a DNA from Jackie Ansell-Lamb's garments. In August 2001, detectives from the Derbyshire Police made a televised appeal for information on a 90-minute programme titled Britain's 10 Most Wanted Murderers. Multiple sources state Jackie Ansell-Lamb and Barbara Mayo's murder were conclusively linked through DNA in 1990. However, this is inaccurate, as although detectives concluded in 1990 that the two murders were likely, but not certainly linked, no DNA profiles were isolated in the murder investigation until 1997, when the DNA profile was isolated from Barbara's clothing. Cheshire Police revealed that at that time, they had not at that point managed to discover any DNA on Jackie's. In the late 2000s, police investigated whether serial killer Peter Tobin could have committed the murders, as he had just been convicted of murders of 3 young women, including that of a hitchhiking girl in 1991. However, police also eliminated him from their inquiries. Criminologist David Wilson stated in a book on Tobin in 2010 that he was unlikely to be responsible and could be ruled out as a suspect by DNA, and that the DNA sample from the 2 murders had already been cross-referenced to Peter Tobin's profile. In 2008, a reclusive man who had just died was found to have newspaper cuttings regarding the Jackie Ansell-Lamb murder hidden in his house alongside a confession to the murder of another woman, 19-year-old Lorraine Jacob. She'd been killed in Liverpool in 1970. The man had previously lived in London, Manchester, Bolton and Wigan before he died of cancer. Investigators said that there was no evidence linking him to Jackie or Barbara's murder, and maybe he had just taken a keen interest in the cases. They pointed out that the man had no access to a car and had never owned a driving licence. In 2009, crime writer Scott Lomax revealed in a book he published about unsolved murders that Manchester City were playing in London at the time of Barbara Mayo's murder, just as in Jackie Ansell-Lamb's case, and that police had never investigated whether the killing could have been from somebody returning from a football match in London, going back down the M1. In 2015, crime writers Chris Clark and Tim Tate published a book in which they claimed that Jackie Ansell-Lamb and Barbara Mayo's murders could be linked to the Yorkshire Ripper Peter Sutcliffe. However, police say that he had already been previously ruled out by investigators in 1997 through DNA. In 2003, Derbyshire Police started to reinvestigate the murders. But who killed Jackie Ansell-Lamb and Barbara Mayo to this day is still unknown. This man may have died by now. Had he been returning from a football match? Was it a man with kids and a wife? Somebody you just would not expect. Many people came forward, but the only DNA profile they did get from Barbara was never linked to anybody else. So maybe this suspect was never arrested for anything and his DNA had never been taken.
This is a very familiar place to me, these woods, as I live barely a stone's throw from here. The woods where Barbara Mayo was killed many, many years ago. And so being so familiar, these woods, the killing of Barbara is never ever far away, even on a daily basis. She was killed along this track just into the woods a short way.
In 1970, as a young detective constable, David Doxey was assigned to Barbara's murder investigation. 20 years later, he's still on the case, but now in charge of the inquiry.
This is where Barbara Mayo was murdered. Her body was actually found a short way into the wood here. She'd been brutally assaulted, she'd been raped, and she'd been strangled to death, a most dreadful crime. The murder of Barbara Mayo was an infamous crime and is well and truly ingrained into local folklore in these parts.
This is the last place that Jackie Ansell-Lamb was seen in March of 1970. It's a transport cafe just off the M6 near Warrington in Cheshire. And at that time, I was a newly appointed detective constable and was seconded onto the inquiry to assist in the murder investigation.
Although police are by no means sure they're looking for one man, there are certainly striking similarities between the murders of Jackie Ansell-Lamb and Barbara Mayo.
I'm absolutely convinced that people still hold information that could take our inquiry forward. I know that some people chose to mislead us many years ago, especially in relation to alibis. Let me say I'm not interested in pursuing legal actions against people who, for one reason or another, chose to mislead us all those years ago. Our main aim is to catch the killer.
And to that end, David Doxey is here. David, you've kept in touch with Barbara Mayo's family all these years. Do you really believe that it's not too late now for this new appeal?
Yes, we're always hopeful. We had a lot of publicity in October, 20 years and a sad anniversary, of course, of Barbara's murder. And from that publicity, the public responded most encouragingly. The lines of enquiry in the main concern the provision of false alibis and checking them out again, and also in relation to people who we are told had cuts or scratches or grazes at that particular time, seen by people, and they were not truly accounted for. And so they harboured those suspicions over the years, but now they feel free to tell us.
The information is obviously there. Why do you think people didn't come forward in the first place?
I think it's a natural reaction and most understandable that people don't contact the police and provide information. I do understand it. I think that their information is perhaps too trivial or they will be made to look foolish. I urge them to put those fears to one side. I really don't believe that only the killer has the identity to Barbara's death, and I would urge those that have information to please contact us, if for no other reason than to remove the anguish from the close family members of Barbara and perhaps Jackie.
Well, Lawrence Mellor, you've been in touch in turn with Jackie Ansell-Lamb's family all this time too. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I'm extremely hopeful that we will receive some very good information tonight. At this stage, we feel that we have everything to gain and nothing to lose, and I'm able to disclose a vital piece of evidence which has not previously been made public because it was used by detectives to eliminate suspects. Forensic scientists who examined Jackie's body recovered several pieces of carpet fibre, and examination of these fibres has shown that they're more likely to have come from a carpet roll or carpet sample rather than the vehicle in which she may have travelled. We know that on the weekend she was murdered, there had been a carpet exhibition at Earl's Court, that Jackie was seen with a man in the Poplar Cafe who was smartly dressed and was described as a rep or a salesman. Are that Jackie's killer is likely to be a man who 20 years ago had some connections with the carpet industry, and I would ask that if anyone has been harbouring any doubts or suspicions about such a person, they contact us now.
So who did murder Jackie Ansell-Lamb and Barbara Mayo? To this day, it's still unknown. And these cases occurred in 1970, and they have still not been solved to this day, and their families still have no answers.